All right. Hey, Facebook. It's been a while. It's been a while since we've been on Facebook Live, at least. So I think you put a couple of our episodes up, right? The last couple weeks.
Yeah, well, we had some video technical issues when we changed formats, and so um, of all the episodes, the only full video we got, I think, was of Kelly Mitchell. But
Yeah.
that was an amazing episode. I'm glad we were able to get the video to work on that one for sure.
Yeah. It was. We are. Looks like we're not live on the Kingdom Effect.
Hmm.
Is it live on the? Oh yeah, it is. That's YouTube. I think we are live. So it looks like it's working on all the channels. Well,
All
hey,
right.
Facebook. It's good to see you. We'll wait just a few minutes till some people get on here. But it's good to be back. We started recording, as you may know, if you listen, we started recording our episodes once a month and all 4 episodes in a day. And we got a little behind. Both Buckley and I have been super busy. And so we didn't get a chance to get our May episodes down. So we thought, hey, let's do it old school. Let's come back on Facebook Live and do it old school. So pretty cool. What'd you think about those last 4 episodes, Buckley? What?
Man, I enjoyed all of them. You and I did one together, just me and you, and we talked about the rite of passage camping trip, that we did with our sons.
That was
That
awesome.
was really, really awesome. And then, Mike Roby working with the area relief ministry and the homeless in Jackson. And, he just is, I didn't even know there was a such thing as getting a
Yeah.
degree in fundraising, but
Yeah.
that's amazing that
That's
he,
the guy I want on my team. I want the professional
yes,
fundraiser on my team, right?
exactly. And
Yeah.
he had a lot of good tips. I thought, because we kind of asked him what advice he would give other nonprofit leaders, and then of course we had Kelly Mitchell,
That was a great
who's
episode, man.
yeah, yeah. Um, you know, her husband was murdered, and um, ultimately donated his organs, and she got to meet some of the recipients, and just knowing that her husband's life just continues to have an effect on the kingdom through these other people, and because of his organ donation. Of course, April was organ donation month, awareness
Hmm.
month, or what have you. So that was really cool. And then my buddy Eric, Eric working at Youth Town with the boys and girls that are working through addiction, and then he and his wife in their private practice, and how they help people walk through different stuff in marriage is just really cool. So
Yeah.
I was really excited. Those were all 4 people or 3 people that I really really wanted to get on the show even from day
Yeah.
one. So I'm glad
Yeah.
we got to do that.
Yeah. It was so good, man. All of them were good in their own way. But man, I tell you, I can't, oftentimes can't quit thinking about Kelly Mitchell and her story and how that whole thing transpired. So it's amazing. It was fun just talking about being dads, right? That's
Oh
our
man, yeah,
episode that we did. I think that was maybe episode 18 or 19, just being dads and trying to figure out how to raise boys, how to get them transitioned to young men. So good
yeah.
stuff.
It's so cool, man. I'm already looking forward to the next trip. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. I actually went this weekend. I went with my family. Took my family. We were kind of glamping.
Mm.
So to get my girls to go camping, you got to kind of step it up a bit. But we have a friend that just built this campground, this little camping spot on their property, and it's up on a hill, and so it's got this really beautiful view. And it was fun. But he's got a super nice. He's got like a toy hauler. You know what a toy hauler is?
Yeah.
Drops down the back, but it's converted into to a camper. It's super cool, man. It was there's not it was kind of like it made you, because I usually feel like if I'm in an RV, I kind of feel like a wimp. But you're inside of a toy hauler, dude. I mean, it's just as comfortable and more comfortable, but it's just something about it that was cool.
No, no propane heaters, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, right. It had everything, dude. It had every form of it had a generator, and the smaller stuff ran on batteries, and then it's a water pump, and then it's got gas for the appliances. It's crazy.
Mhm.
It was super cool. But yeah, man, it was awesome. 2 nights out with the family in the wilderness. It was amazing. So
Yeah, I think they call that staying in a hotel.
it was kind of it was kind of wildernessy. We spent most of our time around the fire because it
Mm,
was freaking cold. It was
mm.
freezing to death. All right, well, let's get this episode started. I'm super excited about it for you Facebook listeners. I was listening to Buckley on another podcast. What podcast was that?
It was Tennessee Underground.
Tennessee Underground. We might want to plug them at the beginning of the episode once we get it rolling here.
Yeah, for sure.
But man, my passion in life is sharing the gospel and making disciples. And you were talking about interrogating, and I just heard so many parallels to how like techniques that you use to get these guys to open up to you, guys and girls, I guess, to open up to you, and then techniques I would recommend for people to have spiritual conversations. So I thought there's nothing more polar opposite. You're trying to get guys to confess to crimes, and the opposite side of that is trying to get people to accept Jesus. But so many parallels and skills that cross over between those two. So that's what we're going to talk about. It'll be interesting for those of you who are on Facebook, and let's get this thing rolling and have an interesting conversation. Ready, Buckley?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. Hey guys, welcome to the Kingdom Effect podcast. This is episode number 23. 23. Me and my buddy Glenn Buckley here. We're going to talk about something very interesting today that I think you'll find super interesting because we did. But I was actually listening to Glenn on another podcast that he was on just a few weeks ago. Glenn, tell us a little bit about that podcast, and then I'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, it's called Tennessee Underground, and a longtime buddy of mine and colleague hosts that show. It's kind of a true crime type podcast, and his name's Jimmy Leach. He retired from TBI, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and actually got into the private investigation world after he retired. And that's kind of I picked his brain a lot when I was thinking of getting into the private investigation business. And so I've been on his show probably 4 or 5 times now, and this was just a really good episode. Every time he has me on, we end up talking about the types of cases I used to work, and because they're just so different. It's such a different area of law enforcement that is really not talked about a lot. So it always is a very interesting topic to touch on.
Yeah. What struck me, I was washing dishes when I was listening to it. So that's what I was doing. I was putting dishes in the dishwasher. And I was thinking about because one thing I'm super passionate about and spend a lot of time and energy on is thinking about having spiritual conversations with people in the places where I work, live, and play, and teaching others and training others to have spiritual conversations. And that's what really struck me as I was listening to you talk. There were just several things that, like, you're talking about skills that you've built and having these conversations with criminals. And I'm thinking that's exactly what I would train someone if I was teaching them to have spiritual conversations at work. And so I was thinking that would be a fascinating episode for the Kingdom Effect to talk about where the crossovers are. And really what you're doing is you're expecting and kind of drawing out in people to talk about things that they're uncomfortable talking about. They don't want to tell you, whether it's a spiritual conversation, because Americans kind of hold their spirituality really close to their chest, and they kind of think of it as a private thing, particularly the boomer generation, particularly among men. And so, like, there were so many crossover skills between you trying to get a criminal to open up and confess a crime and what I would teach. Like I said, what I would teach someone how to have a spiritual conversation in the place where they work. So let's talk about that, man. So walk me through your experience and what you kind of learned. So someone gets brought in. Just set up the context for us. How would an interrogation in your context work?
Yeah. So, it really, I got started in interviewing and interrogating. I was actually in our violent crimes unit, which would have been, robberies, homicides, things like that. And I, I can tell you this, it's a whole lot different interviewing the guy that just robbed the bank than it is interviewing the guys that I ultimately ended up interviewing. And so in about 2010, I transitioned from the violent crimes unit into our internet crimes against children task force. And so I went from interviewing, these gang members and people that just commit these violent crimes to, guys that were soliciting children online or, child pornography cases. And I learned really quick that you don't interview those two people the same. And ultimately, to be honest with you, um, I think that the way we interview our violent offenders I still don't think it's 100% as it should be. I think what I've learned in my experience is the way that I learned and adapted to interview the child predators would kind of works across the board. You always see on TV your interview and interrogation guys. They're always, there's good cop, bad cop. All these different techniques, and at the end of the day, they just really don't work.
Mm.
And so I had to kind of relearn how to interview and interrogate folks. And so, kind of the way it starts out is, they're either in my office because they've been arrested and I needed to conduct the interview, or we haven't decided yet if we're going to bring charges and interview these people. And so, one of the things that I learned really quickly, especially dealing with people that are suspected of committing sexual type crimes, is that you were talking about just a minute ago on how it's hard to talk about things that are personal to us. How more personal can you
Mm.
get than your last sexual encounter, right? And
Mm.
so
Yeah.
I just really had to learn how to slow down and really look at these guys as um, you know children of God who have committed these horrible crimes, but Jesus still loves them, so why can't I still love them? And
Yeah,
so,
like that statement right there in itself is highly controversial, right?
sure.
Yeah, because we equate a person's worth and value on what they do, their behavior and what they've done. So was that like for you, how did you get over that hump, or how did you get to the point where you could view these people as creations of God versus
Honestly, yeah, honestly, I think it was a combination of things. So one, it was outgrowing the traditional teachings and doctrine, if you will, of growing up in the church, right? That these people are beneath me, or because of what they've done, they don't deserve as much mercy or grace as I do. So that's one part of it, kind of outgrowing that and experiencing the gospel in a different way than I had my entire life. And then secondly was just coming to the realization that I've never solicited a child or anything like that, but I've still done some stupid, dumb stuff in my life. And usually there was something that occurred in my life that kind of opened the door for me to walk through and do
Mm,
that stupid boneheaded thing. And as I started to learn the psychology behind sexual deviance and things like that, I started to learn that usually 9 times out of 10, something happened in that person's life that it caused that door to open. They still made the choice to walk through it, but there was some external factor that kind of gave them that first little nudge, whether
yeah,
it was exposure to pornography or they were abused as a child. The list just kind of goes on and on. So once you realize that, man, yeah, this is one of the worst crimes there is, perping on a child. Um, Once you can just come to terms with okay, this is horrible, the worst thing ever, but if they repent and ask Jesus for forgiveness, they're going to get it.
Yeah, that's a hard place to go for a lot of people. But we talk about this a lot, particularly with nonprofit leaders on this podcast who deal with things that are kind of like gross to us, as
Mhm.
Christians. That's one thing that I've recognized is that this shift from thinking that this person is inherently just evil to this person is just simply a product of their past. And
Mm.
whatever happened in their past has led them to this point where they've gotten into some really bad situations and made terrible decisions. But I think like you got to come to a point of humility to realize that, you know what, who's to say that had I experienced the same past that these people have experienced, I wouldn't be in the same seat, right? I
Yeah.
wouldn't be sitting in front of an interrogator. So that's just such a hard barrier, I think, to overcome, an obstacle for people like you or people like me who are having spiritual conversations with deviant people.
Well, it's at the end of the day, there's so many parallels, like you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. I'm talking to criminals and trying to get them to confess. And when you're sharing the gospel with someone, um, they're criminals, and you're trying to get them to confess their sin
Mm,
and come to this realization and this place of brokenness, and then ultimately help them walk through that and take their next step through that. And that's really the kind of the same mindset I had in this interrogation process was, hey, listen, I care about your story. I care about what got you to this point today. And although there are consequences to what you've done, I do care about helping you walk through it. And so that was, guys in the field, in my field at that time, they a lot of them don't see it that way. A lot of them, um, man, they're bad guys. They throw them under the jail and throw the key away. And oftentimes that is, that's a just punishment. But even if that's the case, we can still help them walk through this. We can still love them through Christ and help them, um, become a better person, whether that's in prison or out of prison or wherever it may be. Um, and one of the things that was really unique about, um, the sexual deviant is if for a second you show any type of judgment or disgust at all, and I mean even down to the micro expressions on your face. If they're talking about an act that they carried out on a child and I cringe or look disgusted or look angry or judgmental at all, they immediately shut down. And so it's about building trust, and it's about them believing that, hey man, you can tell me anything and I'm not going to get up and walk out the door. Like I'm going to
mm,
sit here with you through this and I'm not going anywhere. And
yeah,
so, um, which is why I think the bad cop thing doesn't work, like we see in TV. It's almost like the bad cop is scaring people into, confession, and that's a good parallel too. When you start
yeah.
looking at the church, is a lot of times we try to scare people into believing, and so,
Oh, yeah. I
um,
grew up in Alabama, man. Hell and fire, brimstone, whatever you say, fire and brimstone, right? So that's what came out of the pulpit. So, and even the guys that are standing on the street corners, yelling into bullhorns, that's
yeah,
oftentimes what you get.
the end is
But
the end is
that's
near.
yeah, I think the key point in what you just said though is like I think they are waiting to see how you're gonna react to their
Mm,
story, right? And I think
mm,
that's the same thing in spiritual conversations is the moment, like you said, the moment they feel like you're rejecting them is when they actually close up, right? So the key
true.
is just yeah, to be non-reactionary regarding anything that they tell you. And then they just go one layer deeper, I think, as opposed to pulling back and closing up.
Yeah. Well, I think I said in that podcast you listened to that, you, a lot of times as believers, we we'll go out and we'll share the gospel with somebody, but we still have ourselves in our minds, in our hearts. We have ourselves still elevated above them. We're believers. You're not.
Hmm.
You know, we believe and behave, and you don't.
Right.
And so I think a very key part, whether it was in my interrogations or whether you're out discipling and sharing the gospel, is to elevate that person.
Mm.
If you in your mind, if you can elevate them to where you're equals, or
Hmm.
even maybe they're a higher priority to you than yourself, then all that other stuff just kind of happens, you know. But when we keep ourselves elevated and we keep them way down here, man, at the end of the day, it's written all over your face.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what you say or how you say it, if in your heart you have not elevated that person, you can't hide it, right? You can't hide that at all.
Yeah, and I think that actually that putting yourself above them, even all the way down to middle schoolers. Like I have a little middle school group of guys that we have a discipleship group, and we talk about kids in their class. There's this one kid in particular that we talk about almost every week, and he's fighting every week, and he's rebelling against authority, and he's punching girls. And I think what he's doing whenever he's doing that is he's fighting to elevate himself, right? Because he feels so oppressed and suppressed. He feels like he's got to fight to lift himself up, right? And kind of be above every. That's what happens with bullying. Obviously, bullies are the most insecure people on the planet, right?
Mm,
Or oppressive bosses, authoritarian bosses at work are probably the most insecure people at the workplace, right? And so, yeah, people who feel insecure and oppressed or suppressed um, feel like they have to fight for everything they get. And so that kid's just fighting every week to try to maintain his status, right?
yeah,
And so if you approach someone in a spiritual conversation, or in your case, in an interrogation, as being an authority over them, and they're not as good as you, and you're forcing them into something they don't want to talk about, then they're going to fight against you instead of be pulled into the conversation.
yeah. Well, it's like I'm actually writing a book on this, and I talk about in the beginning of it about I took a trip to Kenya, a mission trip, and I went and bought a Bible, you know, that I could take and get take in the bush, and I printed out, you know, the Roman road and all these other little, you know, notes on how to share the gospel with somebody, and I taped them to the inside cover. And you know what happened when I got to Kenya? I don't think I ever got that Bible out of my backpack. But you
Right.
know what I did? I sat down with Kenyans in their huts and shared stories with them, and they shared stories with me, and that really taught me that. And I'm not trying to belittle the scripture at all, but
Mhm.
I'm just saying that what to open that door and take those first steps into that door is just setting down and being honest and real and vulnerable and
Mhm.
sharing stories with each other.
Yeah, for sure. We in our disciple making culture, we call that milk versus meat. Well, actually, scripture also calls it milk versus meat. But milk, mama birds to feed their babies go out and find some food and eat it, and process it. Not as much mommy birds. I guess we should be talking about human beings, real mommies eat food, their body processes it and then spits it back out in a form that a baby's stomach can handle, right? And if you try to shove meat or vegetables down a baby's uh, mouth before their stomach can handle it, then you know digestion problems go crazy, and you can kill them. You can literally just kill them, right? So telling these stories that you're talking about, and putting someone on your level is taking in the scripture yourself, processing it, and then spitting it out in a form that they can receive, right?
Yeah,
So that's called milk versus meat.
yeah, and, you know, and it's so crazy. Like there's times I read scripture. You know, I've been a believer almost my whole life, and you know, there's times I read scripture and I go, I don't understand it. You
Hmm.
know, and so how can I expect someone who's never cracked the Bible open to understand scripture that I'm reading off a piece of paper or recalling reciting from memory? But what resonates, what they understand, is parts of my story and how that lines up with scripture. I've been the prodigal son. I've been the woman at the well. I've been Peter. I've been Joseph. I've been all these people at different points in my life. And so it just makes faith so much easier to understand when you can relate it to a personal experience.
Hmm. Yeah. So a couple of principles I've heard so far in interrogation is elevate the person to your level and pull yourself down to their level so that you're kind of on common ground. You're at a place where you can have a real conversation. The second thing we talked about or that you mentioned was not to ever show any kind of reactionary emotional response to anything that they tell you, right? Uh,
Right.
because once you do, then that could be perceived as rejection, which would close them off and cause them to basically stick their head in their turtle shell. All right.
Yeah. And I think those two go hand in hand. If you get the first one, uh, you know, if you get it down where you elevate them, if you're able to do that, then the disgust and the judgment um, kind of takes care of itself. Because if I've elevated you from being a criminal to being a child of God and a human being who deserves grace and forgiveness and all those things, if I've elevated you to that, then judgment kind of disappears on its own. You know, it's no that not showing expressions and things like that is no longer something I have to think about. It
Hmm.
just subconsciously happens because I've elevated you up, and
Right.
you're a brother or you're a sister.
Yeah,
And
which
so
again is so hard to do when you have preconceived notions of this person sitting in front of you, particularly when it comes to like internet crimes against children, right? Like
yeah,
the in our minds, that's the worst of the worst of the worst, right? And so, man, what the hard it's hard work to do a good interrogation. Apparently, it sounds like it's just really hard work. I'm sure, like you said, though, when you get in the right mindset and you really view this from a heart of humility, knowing that these people have backstories that led them to this place, it becomes a lot more natural. But has there ever been times in interrogations where you actually got to backstories of people that actually had sexual abuse in their childhood?
oh yeah, oh absolutely. I've probably interviewed in the sexual deviant category. I don't know, several hundred
Mm,
um, guys and women too. Um, and man, once you reach that point, and everybody's different, but once you reach that point where they've gained your trust and they know that you're not blowing smoke, and they'll tell you anything and everything. I mean,
mm,
it's almost like they're relieved to talk about it and get it off their chest because one, they've never talked to anybody else about it because they're ashamed of it, and secondly, man, it's kind of like when you become a believer, right? And you reach that point where you're like, man, God, I'm confessing all this sin and I'm giving it to you, giving it over to you. That feeling of the weight being lifted off of you. It's the same thing in the
mm.
interrogation. So they want to tell it. Once you reach a place where they trust you and they know that you're sincere, um, man, they're ready. They're eager. They've been waiting for years, to share this and have this conversation.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's no different from spiritual conversations, with people who are far from God. Once they cross over, because they've got their own barriers to overcome too, just like we do, right?
Hmm.
Their barriers are, they have to really get to that point, they have to come to a place where they're willing to trust you,
Yeah.
right? And people in general, people, whether it's spiritual conversations or interrogations or fill in the blank, they can see right through you. Like if it's not
Mhm.
sincere, they'll see right through you, right? Which will completely shut them down again.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, if you think about it, these guys are looking at. Think of it this way. Think of if you went to sit down with your pastor and talk about the fact that you just had an affair, on your spouse, think
Mhm.
about how hard that is. Now
Mhm.
imagine having to talk to somebody about being sexually attracted to children, or
Mm.
something that you did that's even more shameful, an adulterous affair. So it helps to kind of think of things in that perspective. It kind of helps put it in perspective, as to how difficult it is for these guys and gals to have a real conversation about it. And
Mm.
it's kind of strange because yes, my job, my goal as Glenn, the police officer, was to elicit a confession and prosecute this case. But then also at the same time, I had a goal of hearing their story, reassuring them, hey, life goes on, right? It may not be the life that you want, but life goes on, and you can take steps forward from here. A
Mm.
lot of people, when they get arrested, it's, man, this is it, my life is over. Guys that commit these crimes have the highest rate of suicide
Wow.
when they actually get caught, because nobody wants anything to do with them anymore, because you're so dirty because of what you did, right? There's no washing that off, right? No, there's not enough Clorox in the world to wash off, sexual abuse to a kid.
Wow.
Um,
And that's like, think about how Jesus's message was just right screaming in the face of what you just shared, right? Like there's
yeah,
nothing. Do we really deep down in our heart, do we really believe there's nothing a person can do, to forfeit themselves from his love?
yeah, absolutely. And again, that's the mindset you have to have. What's unfortunate is, here in the West, is we still categorize and label and scale, different sins.
Mm.
And, that at the end of the day, the reality is they're all the same.
Mhm.
They, in God's eyes, they're all the same. And so once you're able to really absorb that and process that and pray through that and ask God to help you live that, um, man, it just makes life so much easier. Not just interview and interrogation, but just in every relationship you have, in your circle, in your walk of life. And I'm just glad I got to implement it in my job and with these men and women, because nobody else that I know of, at least that I was friends with or colleagues with, that did the same thing I did, or some didn't really kind of see it that way. It's and these guys were the scum of the earth, and throw them under the jail and castrate them, and all this other stuff. And again, sometimes I struggle talking about this because I don't want people to think that I'm justifying or saying they shouldn't be punished or anything like that. I 100% think that people that commit these crimes should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean we can't love them through it.
Mhm.
I think that's the difference.
Yeah, it's amazing. Another thing you mentioned in that episode was uh, a key principle that you've kind of learned to have a really good interrogation is helping that person. I don't know that I'd say helping, but leading that person to believe that there's nothing wrong with them,
Yeah.
right? That what the crimes that they've committed are just natural consequences of their past. Now, I don't know. I mean, that's a really tricky thing to say. That gets into that category of what you said, that it's kind of almost hard to even let that come out of my mouth, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah.
But again, the principle is if you can help them feel like uh, they're not so far from normal that they can't like confess this, right? Um, if you can get them to that point to help them realize even that this is a natural consequence of their past where they are today, then that opens them up to share at a deeper level with you, right?
Yeah. And there's so many like, were they born this way, right? There's
Mhm.
that argument.
Right.
There's, where they did something happen in their past, Were they sexually abused? Did mom and dad sell them into human trafficking? What did something else cause this? Um, or did somebody else do this to them? And so I kind of equate that to us, right? You hear people ask all the time, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, I think the answer is because we do dumb stuff,
Yeah.
right? That cause bad things to happen. Secondly, is somebody else does something to us. Or thirdly, sometimes there's not such a clear answer other than we live in a sinful world,
Hmm.
period.
Right.
Right? The creation has not been reconciled yet, right? That's to come. And so we just live in an unreconciled world in creation, and sometimes things just happen for that reason. It's not reconciled yet. And so it's tough. I've met guys that had nothing in their past that pointed them towards this, and so then you go, okay, do they fall into the I was born this way, right?
Hmm.
And then I've had people that were sexually abused um, as a child, and that kind of manifested in their life. Um, and then I've had guys, like we talked about this on the episode where we talked about the pornography. I had guys that were exposed to child pornography overseas, fighting in a war, and became addicted, and brought that addiction back home with them. It's
Right.
kind of like somebody who, hey, my granddad was an alcoholic, my dad was an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic, and you got to go, okay, there is an element of choice there, right? But what were they groomed into? What did they grow up seeing day after day after day? Hey, when things get bad, I drink a beer. When things get bad, I drink the whiskey. That's what dad did. And it's this can be the same thing, right? My dad sexually abused my mom. My dad sexually abused my sister. My dad sexually abused me. And if you don't process that, you're going to carry that with you into adulthood, and
Yeah.
here you are.
Yeah. Do you know any stats on what percentage of people in internet crimes against children have had sexual abuse in their past?
I don't know an exact percentage. Based on my experience, I would say 75%,
Well, okay. Hmm.
some form of it.
Yeah. Another principle you talk about in that episode is not only are you very careful of your micro expressions and reactions, but you're also watching their body language, right? Like
Yeah,
you tell this one story about the guy that was at the church, the pastor, youth pastor at the church, right? And how he's when he got to a certain point in the story, he just completely changed his persona.
sure. Yeah, and that guy, he may be one of those guys that was born that way.
Yeah. Tell that
Um,
story for obviously a lot of people didn't hear that on the other podcast.
yeah, so I had a case where a guy was at a Pentecostal church, and he carried a video camera on a tripod. It was taking it and filming the service. But in reality, what he was doing was in between, getting to church and the service starting, or in between Sunday school and church. Um, he's walking around carrying that camera by the tripod, and was filming up all the skirts of the women and some of the children. And we got a hold of all his stuff, computers and all that, and we identified 42 victims
Wow.
that he had filmed. And so I'm interviewing him, and I'll never forget. I'm sitting across the table from him, and he's handcuffed. And he was kind of, we all have that picture of what the pedophile looks like, and the comb over and the big glasses, and he was very mild and meek, very small guy. And I remember I'm talking to him about the adults that we had identified, and he's sitting there, and he's got his head down, and he's crying, he's sobbing, is he sorry he got caught, or is he really remorseful? I don't know. I
Mhm.
Obviously I can't see his heart, but he's crying, and then once we got done talking about that portion of the case, I start talking about the children that he had filmed, and his whole demeanor and body language instantly changed. I mean, like flicking a switch. He sits up straight, he puffs his chest out, he stops crying, he's very confident. And at some point during that part of the interview, he referred to the videos of the children as his trophies.
Mm.
Right. So he was a sexual deviant in the fact that he was filming up the skirts of anything that had a skirt on. But the adults that he filmed had very little significance to him. But when we started talking about the children that he filmed, obviously that was his trophy, his life's work, this is it, and so guys like that, I'm not really in one way or another if people are born like that, but if there ever was a guy, it would have been this guy for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the principle there is you're watching his reactions as you ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So,
so important. It's so important to especially when time comes for prosecution and you're at a trial and the jury's hearing testimony and things like that. It's so important for the jury to see things like that.
mm,
Right? I can get up and tell them all day long, but if they can see that transition that happened right there, um, I mean, that's worth its weight in gold.
yeah.
When you start talking about prosecution.
Yeah. So again, I know it's really weird to relate this to spiritual conversations. It just feels unnatural. But again, the principle there that I think we can pull from that is as you're having spiritual conversations with, in emotional matters with people, like there's so many times where just out of the blue, at the time when I would at least expect it, you start to see a tear roll down someone's eye, right? Or you start to see their lip quiver a little bit. It's just these little cues that something's happening on the inside that you can't see,
Mhm.
right? It's just they're outward signs of something that's happening inwardly with people. And obviously, we're talking about the reverse from someone that wants to close up because he's don't want to talk about that portion of the conversation, and so he freezes, and he makes himself look all confident. It's kind of the opposite where a person starts real confident, like they're got everything under the control, and you ask a question or a thought kind of comes across or words come out of their mouth, and you can see an emotional reaction.
Well,
Those
actually,
moments.
the same thing. Actually, the same thing you said, where you're talking to somebody and you see the emotion, and it's because something's stirring that
Right.
hasn't come out yet. That happens too, right?
Yeah.
That happens to the guy that's maybe he's married and has kids, but also downloads child porn,
Hmm.
for whatever reason, and um, you could always tell. Like I'm talking to them, and they haven't quite opened up yet, but you look for those little cues, the eyes watering up, the lip quivering, things like that, the nervousness, fidgeting, because now I know, okay, he's got it, he's ready to talk about it,
Hmm.
and then I have to gauge, okay, do I to back off and give him space
Hmm.
and
Right.
let him process and then talk about it, or is there something else I need to do to, lack of a better word, encourage him to dig deeper and build that courage up to talk.
Yeah. I do this often, but just a couple months ago, I was having a conversation with a lady who's a business owner, and she just kind of wants to sell her business. She didn't intend to have a successful business, but it just took off because she's really good at what she does, and she has no desire to be a business owner. So she's wanting to get out from under the business ownership piece. So, but yeah, well, I was having a conversation with her, and uh, just something was said. I don't remember if it's she might have mentioned late night conversations about business when her kids want her to read a book or something like that, and she just got very visibly emotional. And I do this often, like because I'm pretty bold when it comes to these things. So I just looked at her and said, "What's that emotion about? Like, what just happened inside of you that created that emotion?" And that is a huge door. If you feel like if you have their trust and you feel like they're going to be honest and open with you, that's a really cool question to throw
Mm,
out there and
mm,
just see what they say. Yeah, and so that led to this whole conversation about how the business is taking her away from what she feels like is most important in her life with her children, which
yeah.
all of a sudden went from a conversation about selling a business to something as critical as you know, stewarding her children well. Like that's
Well,
a massive shift in a conversation, right?
absolutely. And I'll say this too. Don't be afraid to get close.
Yeah.
And I don't mean emotionally. I mean physically,
Mm,
right? Like there's nothing wrong. Like there was guys that I'd be interviewing and I could tell they were struggling. And man, just reach over and put my hand on his forearm, reach
mm,
across the table.
mhm.
Or when we were rescuing trafficking victims, just reach over and put my arm around her. Don't have to say a word,
Mhm.
right? But just that there's something about that physical connection, that safe touch that says, man, this this person really does care, you
Yeah,
know?
what criminal in an interrogation room would expect someone to reach over and comfort them, right?
Yeah, right.
It's
Well, I'll tell
amazing.
you, I was a young investigator, and there was a very veteran investigator, and I watched him during an interrogation just stop right in the middle and start praying for the
Wow.
uh, for the guy he
That's
was interviewing. And at the time, I didn't get it.
yeah,
I'm like, oh, this is a cool trick, to trick this guy into confessing. But as I got to know the investigator, man, no, dude, his heart was real. It's
yeah.
like, man, let me pray for you, dude. And so this was not something that happened overnight that I learned overnight.
Right.
These were different things that happened throughout the course of my life that God had intervened in my life at different stages of my life, and this was just kind of the culmination of it. And I think that if I could leave everybody with one simple thing to do, it's the people in your life, whether it's family, friends, coworkers, somebody that you're intentionally trying to disciple or share the gospel with, or if it's somebody you're interrogating in an interview room, elevate them,
Mm,
see them as who they are, who they were intended to be, which
wow.
which is a child of God. That's it. Period. If you can take that one step, all the other things we've talked about happen naturally. And that's but that's the hardest part to do. You know why?
That's
Because we're
hard.
taught we're taught growing up in church, right?
Yeah.
Oh, he told a little white lie, so he's good. He can still be a deacon. This guy got divorced, so he can't.
Mm,
This guy, did this, so we're not even gonna let him in the doors.
mhm.
Or the homeless guy comes in to attend service, so the security team, you know, set on all sides of him. Until we stop seeing people and identifying people for how the world labels them or for what
Wow.
they do,
So good.
until we stop doing that, what are we
Yeah,
doing?
right, and we said this a couple weeks ago on I can't remember which episode, but I think the number one top of the list difference in a nonprofit leader that can give their life away to broken people versus, someone sitting in a church pew or just living their life. The number one differentiator is the fact that they see their clients for not for where they are currently, but for their potential,
Mm,
like where they can be if they get the right support and the right help. That's the difference, man. It's like that person sitting in front of you, are you judging them for who they are today, or are you looking at them through the eyes of Jesus, knowing what their potential is? Like Jesus, like, I think of the lady that was being the prostitute that was being stoned to death by the religious leaders, and Jesus stepped in, you who are without sin, cast the first stone.
mm,
He looked at that young girl for the potential that she had inside of her, not the mistakes of her past. And
yeah.
I just that creates so much tension in me to think about these internet children, crimes against internet children. How do you say it?
Internet crimes
Right,
against
crimes
children.
against children. Yeah, that creates so much tension in me to think that these people that have created crimes against children are just like that. They have this huge potential in Christ if they just get the right help and right support. Now, again, you've said it and I say it. So we affirm they have to pay for
Sure.
their mistakes. Like they're responsible to receive their due punishment. But man, and you know that nothing will break them more. Like when we
Well,
talk.
look at the thief on the cross
Yeah,
of crucifixion, right? He was
uh-huh,
paying his price
right.
for stealing.
That's
Um,
a great example.
yes, but you know, Jesus loved him right there on the cross while he's paying his, his punishment. And today you'll be with me in paradise, right?
That's
And
an example.
yeah, and so that's how we have to look at it, man. Jesus didn't just see another dude hanging on the cross, that stole a loaf of bread or whatever. Jesus saw one of his children. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah. And then relating that to spiritual conversations, that I mean, it's so easy. Just look at the people around you. We judge constantly. We never stop judging based on our culture and based on our perception of people, right? I do it all the time. I walk
Yeah,
around. Part of my job is to walk around and talk to people at our workplace, and like I'll approach a person with this, perception in my mind. I mean, that's just confession moment, but yeah, so how do we train ourselves? How do we get accustomed to how does it become second nature for us to view a person for their potential and not their past?
I'll tell you what did it for me, and it's so weird, guys that are listening. Kevin and I did not plan this, I promise. But part of my testimony with the nonprofit I started, Scarlet Rope, started from um, my pastor preaching a sermon on John chapter 8, and nothing he really said resonated with me. Just that story resonated, and the more I thought about it, the more I read it. And I tell people this when I speak in public about this nonprofit. I tell that story, and I said Jesus never intended for that story to stop at cast the first stone. Right? That's not where he intended that story to stop. That's where it stops because that's where the church stops it, right? But what did Jesus do after all the stones were dropped? Jesus bent down, he picked her up, he touched her, he let her know he cared about her. Jesus got her dirt on him, right? That's that story doesn't stop at just dropping your stone,
Yeah.
right? That just means I'm not going to judge you, right? But you got
Mhm.
to take it a step further, and you got to love them. That's the hard part, I think.
Mm, man, it's good stuff. It's hard. It's creating tension in me when we're talking about it right now. So, but
Yeah, yeah.
the cool thing is that's where we grow is when we face tension. So yeah, I guarantee you there's people listening, and I mean I'm excited about listening to this again and just processing my emotions through it. But there's people listening right now that are probably struggling, with how they feel about this issue. So yeah, I just encourage you guys to think about it, process it, let it work itself out in you. But really think through, like, I think the key question if you're wrestling with these issues is if you had experienced a different past, who would you be today?
Mhm.
Right? Like we said earlier. We said that
Or
earlier.
or if you just made a different choice somewhere
Mhm.
along the line. If I
Yeah.
if I chose this versus this,
Yeah.
where would I be?
Right. So yeah, it's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, before we close out, we just got a text or a comment, excuse me, from Daniel Breeden. He's with Operation Saving Life with
Mhm.
Scott Horde. They said he's been listening in and out on the podcast, and while he was doing so, they just rescued another child
Wow. That's
there
awesome.
in Nashville. So awesome job, man.
Yep.
Awesome job, Daniel and Scott and all the guys that work with that ministry.
Oh yeah, we love Operation Saving Life. So man, you guys are doing it. You're out there every day doing the hard work of saving babies' lives. So good job. Well, cool, man. Any last thoughts before we close out the episode?
I don't think so. Man, I'm just excited to be back. You know,
Yeah.
even though we recorded all 4 episodes in one day, it still feels like there's been so much time in between. You know, the
Yeah.
last
Right.
time we got to do this, and so
Yeah.
um, I don't know. I'm curious to know. You guys that are listening, you know, maybe shoot us a comment or something and let us know how you like the new format. If you like that better, or if you like the old school. You know, you're on Facebook Live. You know, we're open to what you guys want to see and what you want to hear.
Hmm. Yeah, it's good. We always love to hear for sure. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode of the Kingdom Effect podcast. It had a lot of tension in it. There's going to be some things I'm going to be wrestling with tonight as I'm lying in bed, and that some of you guys might be wrestling with after you listen to it. And I just want to affirm that the wrestling is good, right? The wrestling is where we grow. So wrestle with some of these things. Think about how it relates to your day-to-day conversations and the places where you live, work, and play, and just let it work itself out in you. And I guess I haven't made 100% conclusion on how I feel about it yet, so I'm looking forward to that. So, but thank you guys for joining us. If you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, that would be awesome. Help the word get out. If you're on Facebook, you find us at our Facebook group at Kingdom Effect Podcast, and like and share that and interact with us. We always like to get some good interaction on that page. And man, thanks for joining us, and give you a lot to chew on tonight. And looking forward to talking to you guys next time. So thank you for listening to the Kingdom Effect Podcast, and we'll see you next time.